So, we live in a culture that was absolutely obsessed with the idea of a natural.
Oh, completely. We worship at the altar of the overnight genius.
Right. I mean, just think about it for a second. We watch these precocious teenagers on television singing with the voices of seasoned professionals.
Or we read those glowing magazine profiles about, 22-year-old tech billionaire founders.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
And we marvel at athletes who seem to just glide across the field without breaking a sweat. And while we're watching all of this, there's this very quiet, kind of insidious question that creeps into the back of our minds.
do I have that magical spark?
Right. Am I smart enough? Am I talented enough? And you, listening right now, you might be evaluating your own life today, wondering if you hit a ceiling simply because you weren't born with the right cognitive lottery ticket.
It's a heavy thought. But what if the secret to staggering, world-changing success has most nothing to do with your IQ or your innate natural abilities?
Which is a wild proposition.
It really is. It completely upends how we evaluate human potential. And that is the exact premise we are dissecting in today's deep dive. We are pulling our insights from the extensive research and the framework laid out by psychologist Angela Duckworth in her book, Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance.
It's such a foundational
It
text.
absolutely is. And the mission we have today is highly specific. We are going to unpack the exact scientifically backed anatomy of grit, which is defined as the intersection of passion and perseverance.
Passion and perseverance.
Right. We're going to look at why our society harbors this deep, almost invisible prejudice against hard work, despite what we might claim on surveys. And most importantly, we're going to lay out a practical roadmap for how you can cultivate grit in your own life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand where this concept comes from, we have to look at the proving ground where it was first put to the ultimate test. And this isn't a corporate boardroom or a university classroom.
No, we are talking about the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Exactly. And specifically, a grueling 7-week initiation known as Beast Barracks. Just set the context for you. Getting into West Point is not like applying to a typical college. The admissions process is incredibly intense.
You should start in your junior year of high school, right?
Yeah, junior year. You need stellar SAT scores. You have to secure a literal nomination from a member of Congress, a U.S. senator, or the vice president. On top of that, you have to pass a rigorous physical fitness assessment.
So they're filtering heavily from day one.
Oh, massively. Tens of thousands start the process, and only about 1,200 are actually admitted. Almost all of them were varsity athletes. Many were team captains. They are, on paper, the absolute best of the best.
The elite.
But historically, 1 in 5 of these elite, hyper-talented cadets will drop out before graduation. And the vast majority of those dropouts happen in the very first summer, during Beast Barracks.
Which is completely understandable once you look at the psychological and physical reality of Beast Barracks. The system is intentionally designed to find a cadet's breaking point.
It sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It is. The day begins at 5 a.m. By 5:30 a.m., they are standing at attention. From that moment on, it is a non-stop rotation of physical training, marching, weapons instruction, and intense classroom time until lights out at 10:00 p.m.
With no weekends off.
No weekends off, no breaks other than meals, almost zero contact with the outside world. The U.S. Army recognized that this was a massive loss of investment, so for decades, they tried to figure out how to predict who would survive this crucible.
Because they're losing so much money and talent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted to know why a kid who spent 2 solid years jumping through hoops to get into this prestigious academy would suddenly throw in the towel after just a few weeks.
And their early attempts to predict this were completely unsuccessful, right? I read in the sources that back in 1955, they brought in a psychologist named Jerry Kagan.
Yes, Kagan.
And he spent hundreds of hours giving new cadets these vague ink blot-style tests, showing them pictures and asking them to make up stories about what was happening in the images.
Right. The thinking was that they could measure deep unconscious motives. If a cadet visualized noble deeds and courageous acts, they would surely be the ones to graduate.
But that failed entirely, didn't it?
It failed entirely. The stories a cadet made up in a quiet room had absolutely zero predictive power regarding what they would actually do when they were sleep-deprived, covered in mud, and being yelled at by a commanding officer.
Makes sense. A quiet room is very different from Beast Barracks.
Exactly. So the military eventually abandoned that and leaned heavily on a metric they called the whole candidate score. This was a meticulously calculated weighted average of a candidate's high school rank, their SAT or ACT scores, expert appraisals of their leadership potential, and objective measures of their physical fitness.
So it was essentially the ultimate comprehensive measure of talent and aptitude,
Right.
which seems perfectly logical. If you want the best soldiers, you measure who is the smartest, the fastest, and the strongest.
Yeah.
But that is where the mystery really deepens.
Because the whole candidate score was useless for predicting who would stay during Beast Barracks.
Utterly useless. The cadets with the absolute highest whole candidate scores were dropping out at the exact same rate as the cadets who barely scraped by with the lowest passing scores.
Natural talent offered zero guarantee of survival.
And that is the exact paradox that Angela Duckworth stepped in to solve. She brought a completely different diagnostic tool to West Point, the grit scale.
And compared to the exhaustive whole candidate score, the grit scale is remarkably simple.
Just a few questions, right?
Yeah, half of the questions measure perseverance. They ask how much you agree with statements like, I finish whatever I begin, or I have overcome setbacks to conquer an important challenge.
And the other half?
The other half of the questions measure passion, asking things like, do your interests change from year to year? Or do you get obsessed with an idea only to lose interest shortly after? She administered this scale to over 1,200 West Point cadets on their second day of Beast Barracks.
And the results she found absolutely shattered the conventional wisdom about talent. By the last day of Beast, 71 cadets had dropped out. And the grit scale turned out to be an astoundingly reliable predictor of who made it through.
Grit, not talent, predicted survival.
What's even more fascinating is that the whole candidate score had absolutely no relationship to grit. You could be a literal genius with off-the-charts athletic ability and still score terribly on the grit scale.
It completely decouples ability from resilience. Military psychologist Mike Matthews, who had extensive experience in the Air Force, pointed out why this happens.
What did he find?
He observed that when a challenge severely exceeds your current skills, which is exactly what Beast Barracks is designed to do, innate ability won't save you.
Because you can't just rely on what you're already good at.
Right. When you are being asked hour after hour to perform tasks you cannot yet do, your natural talent is neutralized. What matters in that specific environment is a never-give-up attitude. It requires a completely different psychological gear.
And it is not just the military. That is what makes this so applicable to all of us.
Yeah.
The songs show that Duckworth took this grit scale into a bunch of vastly different high-stress environments.
She tested salespeople at a vacation timeshare company, which is an industry where you just face brutal hourly rejection.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is. After 6 months, 55% of those salespeople had quit. But the ones who stayed, they were the grittiest. And grit predicted their job retention better than their extroversion, their emotional stability, or how conscientious they were.
She found the exact same thing in the Chicago public schools, didn't she?
Yes. Grittier students were more likely to graduate on schedule, and grit was a more powerful predictor of graduation than how safe the students felt or how much they cared about school.
She even studied the Green Berets, tracking who made it through their brutal Special Forces selection course. They have this terrifying obstacle course called Nasty Nick.
I've seen videos of that. It's intense.
And again, grit separated the men who made it from the 42% who voluntarily withdrew.
But perhaps the most compelling application of her research was when she took it out of these physical, high-stress arenas and applied it to a purely intellectual crucible.
The Scripps National Spelling Bee.
Exactly.
If you have ever seen the documentary Spellbound, you know exactly how intense this is. You have these middle school kids standing on a stage under bright television lights, spelling incredibly obscure words like schottisch.
And as an audience, we automatically assume these kids are just precocious verbal prodigies.
Right, we think they have photographic memories, that they are basically walking dictionaries. But when Duckworth sent the grit scale to hundreds of these competitors, the data told a completely different story.
The data revealed that the grittier kids advanced much further in the competition. And when you look at the mechanics of why, it really strips away the magic of it.
They advanced further because they simply studied for more hours.
Exactly. They studied more and they had competed in more spelling bees over the years. Some of these kids were practicing up to 9 hours on a Saturday.
9 hours.
I know. Now, verbal intelligence certainly helped them advance, but there was a crucial counterintuitive finding. Verbal IQ and grit had absolutely no relationship.
So being smart didn't mean they worked harder.
Right. The spellers with the highest verbal IQs did not study any more hours than the less naturally able spellers.
That is a massive realization. It really makes you stop and think about how we evaluate people in our own lives.
Absolutely.
If you are a manager hiring for a new team, or if you are evaluating yourself for a career pivot, are you placing too much weight on the resume? Are you obsessing over the prestigious university degree, the standardized test scores, the polished whole candidate score?
And by doing that, you are completely undervaluing a person's actual track record of following through when things get hard.
We are so deeply conditioned to look for that shiny spark of natural ability, but we completely blind ourselves to the enduring power of effort. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Because it raises a profound psychological question. If the data is so overwhelmingly clear, if grit predicts retention in the military, graduation in schools, sales numbers in business, and success in spelling bees, why do we still maintain this intense cultural worship of talent?
Why are we practically brainwashed to revere the natural? That is the perfect question to ask, because it leads us directly into exploring this insidious hidden bias we all carry,
We have to look at Angela Duckworth's own origin story to really understand this.
which is just filled with incredible irony. When she was growing up, her father was utterly preoccupied with intelligence. He would constantly measure everyone against this impossible standard.
He said randomly announced to her, you're no genius.
Imagine hearing that as a kid.
Right. It was his way of expressing anxiety that without this magical innate brilliance, she would be severely limited in what she could achieve.
Fast forward a few decades, and Duckworth is awarded the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship. The media literally refers to this as the Genius Grant.
The irony is perfect.
And she won it specifically for her research, proving her father completely wrong about what actually matters for success.
It is the ultimate vindication. But her understanding of this dynamic didn't just come from her childhood, it was forged during her time as a teacher.
Before she was a psychologist, right?
Yes, Duckworth taught 7th grade math. She taught in a very rough and tumble public school on the Lower East Side of New York. And she also taught at Lowell High School in San Francisco, which is a highly elite, merit-based academy that acts as a feeder for the Ivy League.
And in both of these wildly different environments, she noticed the exact same perplexing pattern.
The naturals versus the strivers.
Exactly. She had students who were naturals. They could watch her solve an algebraic equation once on the board, nod their heads, and immediately understand the concept.
But those naturals often plateaued. They didn't consistently put in the work, and they didn't earn the highest grades over the long term.
On the other hand, she had the strivers. These were the students who initially struggled, who had to ask a dozen questions, who stayed in her classroom during their lunch breaks for extra help.
And invariably, the strivers ended up outperforming the naturals.
There is a specific student of hers from Lowell High School that perfectly illustrates this. His name was David Luong. David was placed in her regular freshman algebra class because he hadn't scored high enough on the placement exam to get into the accelerated track.
He wasn't the kid waving his hand in the air to answer questions.
But Duckworth noticed that he turned in perfect homework every single time. He was just undeniably hungry to learn. When he made a mistake on a quiz, he would relentlessly dissect it to figure out what he did wrong.
She quickly realized that placing him in the regular track based on a single aptitude test was a massive mistake.
So she marched him into the department chair's office and fought to get him transferred into the advanced class.
And it wasn't an instant success story. When David moved to the advanced class, he struggled. He got a B, and then he got a D on a math test.
A tough blow.
But instead of accepting that D as proof that he lacked talent, he analyzed his errors, adapted his study habits, and kept pushing. By his senior year, he scored a perfect 5 on the AP Calculus exam.
And he went on to earn dual degrees in engineering and economics from Swarthmore College, and then a PhD in mechanical engineering from UCLA.
He literally became a rocket scientist, optimizing thermodynamic processes for the Aerospace Corporation.
This kid, who supposedly didn't have the natural talent for high school advanced math, outcased everyone through sheer, dogged perseverance.
But despite stories like David's, we still have this massive cultural blind spot. And this is where the research gets slightly uncomfortable because it exposes how much we lie to ourselves.
The naturalness bias.
Yes. Chiyoung Se is a researcher who studies this. If you conduct a survey and ask Americans which is more important to success, talent or effort, they will endorse effort and hard work by a massive margin, roughly 5-1.
We loudly proclaim that we love the striver, we respect the grind, we value the underdog.
But Satan designs subconscious tests that completely contradict what we say.
The methodology of her studies is brilliant.
It really is. She conducted an experiment with professional musicians. She had them listen to 2 separate audio recordings of a piano performance. Before playing the first track, she told the listeners that the pianist was a natural who demonstrated early, innate musical talent.
Okay.
Before playing the second track, she told them the pianist was a striver who achieved their skill through high motivation, perseverance, and years of grueling practice.
But the catch is that the audio for both tracks was exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
It was the exact same performance.
Exactly the same audio, yet the professional musicians, people who know what it takes to master an instrument, judge the so-called natural to be far more likely to succeed, significantly more hireable, and just generally a superior player.
Their subconscious bias completely overrode their objective hearing.
It did, and she didn't just stop with musicians. She replicated the study in the business world.
How did that one work?
She had adults listen to an audio recording of an entrepreneur pitching a business proposal. Half the listeners were told the entrepreneur was a striver who built their success through relentless hard work. The other half were told the entrepreneur was a natural with this innate, unteachable business acumen.
And let me guess, same audio pitch.
Same audio pitch. And once again, the natural was rated higher, considered more hireable, and their business proposal was judged to be fundamentally superior.
That is just wild.
Say actually quantified this bias. She found that in order for people to view the two entrepreneurs equally, the striver had to have 4 more years of leadership experience and $40,000 more in startup capital just to level the playing field against the mere perception of natural talent.
That is a massive handicap we place on people who work hard. And while it might seem like a quirky psychological bias in a controlled study, the real-world implications are devastating, especially in education.
Absolutely. Think about Scott Barry Kaufman.
Yes, his story is incredible. Today, he is a highly respected cognitive scientist. But as a child, he suffered from recurring ear infections that caused a central auditory processing disorder.
Because he was always a step behind the other kids in processing information, he was placed in special education.
He was even forced to repeat the 3rd grade. Eventually, a school psychologist gave him a standardized IQ test under highly stressful timed conditions. He scored so poorly that he was sent to a specialized school for children with learning disabilities.
Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Because he was told he lacked natural talent, he assumed he had a permanently low ceiling on his life. He just accepted it. It wasn't until he was 14 years old that a special education teacher looked at him and simply asked, "Why aren't you in more challenging classes?"
That one single question, that tiny spark of belief, completely changed his trajectory.
He wanted to prove that he was intellectually capable. He decided to pick up the cello, and he started practicing with an intensity that is hard to fathom. He practiced 8 or 9 hours a day.
He skipped his lunch period to practice. He skipped regular classes to practice.
Through pure effort, he became the 2nd-best cellist in his high school orchestra. He started excelling in honors classes.
But the system still tried to hold him back based on his old metrics. When he applied to join the gifted and talented program, the school psychologist actually drew a bell curve on a napkin.
Unbelievable.
The psychologist pointed to the middle and said, "This is average," then pointed to the far right and said, "This is where you have to be to get into the program," and finally pointed to the far left and said, "And this is where you are."
They completely shut the door on him based on an outdated assessment of his innate talent.
But Scott didn't quit. He applied to Carnegie Mellon's cognitive science program, but his SAT scores weren't high enough. So, knowing they didn't require SAT scores for the arts, he auditioned for their opera program instead.
That is brilliant.
Once he was accepted, he took psychology as an elective, eventually transferred his major, graduated Phi Beta Kappa, and went on to earn a PhD from Yale University.
His life is a testament to the danger of talent testing. It places a false, suffocating ceiling on human potential.
And if we zoom out from individual education to the macro level, this obsession with talent has literally ruined massive billion-dollar corporations.
Oh, the Enron story.
Yes, you can trace this directly back to the management consulting firm McKinsey. In the late 1990s, they published this incredibly influential report called The War for Talent.
Their core argument was that companies will only rise or fall based on their ability to attract and retain A players, people with massive intrinsic intellectual gifts.
You don't train them, you just hire the naturals. This philosophy was adopted wholeheartedly by Enron, which was one of the largest energy trading companies in the world before its catastrophic collapse.
Enron CEO Jeff Skilling implemented a performance review system called Rank and Yank. Every year, employees were graded, and the bottom 15% were immediately fired, regardless of their absolute performance or how hard they tried.
It created an incredibly toxic environment.
As journalist Malcolm Gladwell pointed out when analyzing Enron's downfall, when you demand that your employees constantly prove they are the smartest people in the room, you inadvertently create a hyper-narcissistic culture.
It breeds deep, pervasive insecurity. People spend all their energy showing off and taking credit rather than collaborating.
It incentivizes short-term performance at the expense of long-term stability.
And most dangerously, in a culture where lacking genius means you lose your job, nobody will ever admit to a mistake. They will hide their errors rather than learn from them.
Which is exactly what led to Enron engaging in massive, systematic accounting fraud, resulting in what was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history.
When being a genius is the only currency that matters, people will eventually fake it to survive.
There's a very deep philosophical reason why we cling to this destructive myth, and the 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche articulated it perfectly.
He observed that when we witness a perfect performance, a beautiful piece of music, a flawless athletic feat, we don't like to ask how it came to be. We prefer to rejoice in it as if it sprang out of the ground by magic.
And Nietzsche argued that we do this to protect our own egos. He said that our vanity promotes the cult of the genius, because if we think of genius as something magical, divine, and entirely unteachable, we are not obliged to compare ourselves to it.
To call someone divine means here there is no need to compete.
That is a harsh, necessary truth. Labeling someone a natural lets us off the hook. It gives us a built-in, culturally acceptable excuse for why we haven't achieved greatness ourselves. We can just shrug and say, well, I wasn't born with it.
But if talent is vastly overrated, and if hiding behind the myth of the natural is just a psychological defense mechanism, then how exactly does effort work?
How do we quantify it? We need to look at the actual mechanics of achievement.
To understand the mechanics, we should turn to the work of sociologist Dan Chambliss. He spent 6 years conducting an incredibly in-depth qualitative study of competitive swimmers.
He observed everyone from local youth clubs all the way up to elite Olympic teams.
He eventually published his findings under a brilliant title, The Mundanity of Excellence. Chambliss concluded that superlative performance is not superhuman. It is actually just a confluence of dozens of small skills or activities, each one learned or stumbled upon, which have been carefully drilled into habit and then fitted together in a synthesized whole.
The word mundanity is so perfect. It strips away all the magic and the mystique.
It does. It reveals that excellence is getting up at 4 a.m. every day. It is doing a flip turn 10,000 times until the angle of your feet against the wall is absolutely perfect. It is eating the right food, getting the right sleep.
The excellence is the aggregate of countless ordinary correct actions.
But as Chambliss noted, the mundanity of it is a hard sell. Even other elite swimmers fall for the myth of talent. He recounted a story about watching Mark Spitz, the legendary 7-time Olympic gold medalist, swimming laps.
Even the other elite swimmers on the pool deck stopped what they were doing to stare in awe, with one of them whispering, "My God, he's a fish."
Because it's so much easier to believe he's a fish than to acknowledge the thousands of agonizing hours he spent staring at the black line at the bottom of the pool.
We only see the final, dazzling performance on television once every 4 years. We don't see the mundane grind. So Duckworth knew she needed a theory to explain exactly how these mundane hours translate into that final greatness.
Her advisor in graduate school, the psychologist Marty Seligman, really challenged her on this. He told her she didn't have a coherent theory of achievement.
So she sat down and created 2 incredibly elegant equations that form the bedrock of everything we are talking about today.
These 2 equations clarify the relationship between talent, effort, and skill. Equation number 1 is talent multiplied by effort equals skill.
Okay, talent times effort equals skill.
Equation number 2 is skill multiplied by effort equals achievement.
Skill times effort equals achievement.
I want you to really visualize those equations. Talent matters. Talent dictates how rapidly your skills improve when you invest effort. But look at where effort sits in those formulas. Effort is in the equation twice.
Effort counts twice. That is the ultimate aha moment. First, your effort builds your skill, and then your effort makes that skill productive, turning it into actual achievement.
If you take 2 people, and one of them is twice as talented as the other, the highly talented person still has to put in effort to build their skill.
But if the person with half the talent works twice as hard, they can reach the exact same level of skill.
And here is where the math really favors the striver. Because they have built the habit of working twice as hard, Over a lifetime, they will produce exponentially more achievement using that hard-earned skill.
We can see this play out in the lives of incredibly prolific creators. Take the celebrated potter Warren Mackenzie.
He lived into his 90s and spent his entire adult life dedicated to his craft. He didn't just make one or two masterpieces and call it a day.
He would throw 40 or 50 pots in a single day. He famously said, the first 10,000 pots are difficult, and then it gets a little bit easier.
Through immense effort, his skill improved. But with that same steady effort, the number of beautiful, enduring pots he brought into the world multiplied. His ultimate achievement was the sheer volume of excellence he produced over decades.
Another powerful example is the novelist John Irving. He is widely lauded as one of the great storytellers of modern American literature. He has won the National Book Award and an Academy Award for his screenwriting.
But if you look at his early metrics, he had no talent. He was severely dyslexic. He got a C- in high school English. His SAT verbal score was a 475 out of 800, which placed him in the bottom third of all students.
His teachers thought he was just lazy or incapable. But Irving realized early on that to do anything well, he had to overextend himself. He had to pay twice as much attention as anyone else.
He discovered that rewriting is what he does best. He said, it doesn't hurt anyone as a writer to have to go over something again and again.
He took his profound cognitive disadvantage and used it to build the stamina to endlessly revise his work. Daily effort built his mastery, and continued effort produced stories that touched millions of people.
When we talk about the sheer stamina of effort, it's impossible not to mention Will Smith's philosophy on his own success. He has articulated this dual equation perfectly in his own words.
What do you say?
He has said, I've never really viewed myself as particularly talented. Where I excel is ridiculous, sickening work ethic.
That's intense.
He uses this brilliant metaphor, saying that if you and he get on a treadmill together, there are only two outcomes. You are getting off first, or he is going to die.
It sounds extreme, but it perfectly captures the mindset. He is not afraid to die on a treadmill to outwork his competition.
And what is so incredible is that this exact metaphor, the treadmill, was the subject of a rigorous, decades-long scientific study at Harvard University.
Back in 1940, researchers asked 130 college sophomores to run on a treadmill for up to 5 minutes. But this wasn't a standard gym warm-up.
This treadmill was set at such a steep angle and at such a blistering speed that the average young man lasted only 4 minutes, and some were completely exhausted after just a minute and a half.
The test was intentionally designed to be agonizing. They weren't just measuring aerobic capacity, they were measuring a person's stamina and strength of will.
They wanted to see how far a person was willing to push themselves before the punishment became simply too severe to tolerate.
Decades later, a psychiatrist named George Vaillant followed up on those exact same men when they were in their 60s. He had gathered massive files bursting with data on their lives, their income levels, their career advancement, the stability of their marriages, the number of sick days they took, and their psychological visits.
And the correlation he found was staggering. The amount of time a 20-year-old kid managed to stay on that agonizing treadmill reliably predicted their lifelong psychological adjustment and overall well-being.
Even after the researchers adjusted for baseline physical fitness, the correlation held true.
Because staying on the treadmill isn't about cardio, it's a profound indicator of how we handle the marathon of life. When things get hard, do you step off or do you keep running?
Duckworth actually interviewed Vaillant, and he admitted he wasn't great at short-term puzzles. He said he'd check the answers to a crossword puzzle if he got frustrated.
But when it came to his life's work following these men for decades, compiling the data, writing the studies, he never stopped. He was persistent. He stayed on his treadmill.
This brings us to a crucial moment for self-reflection. I want you to audit your own treadmills. Think about your basement or your garage. How many exercise bikes are gathering dust?
How many fad diets have you abandoned after 2 weeks? How many creative projects, business ideas, or hobbies did you start with immense fiery enthusiasm only to drop them permanently the moment you hit a plateau in your progress?
Woody Allen was entirely correct when he observed that 80% of success in life is showing up. The most common issue we face isn't a lack of intensity, it is a lack of consistency.
When you permanently turn your back on a commitment, your effort drops to zero. According to our equations, when effort is zero, your skills stop improving and your achievement grinds to a halt. The steady, daily commitment to get back on the treadmill is the only way effort can compound and count twice.
So if the secret is staying on the treadmill, that naturally raises a terrifying question. How do we make absolutely sure we are on the right treadmill?
That's the million-dollar question.
Nobody wants to spend 10 years grinding away at something, only to wake up and realize they climbed the wrong mountain. And this leads us directly into how we define true passion, because the way society talks about passion is completely misguided.
There was a story in the sources about a Wharton Business School entrepreneur that perfectly highlights this. He rushed up to Duckworth after one of her lectures, bragging about his prodigious grit.
He was talking incredibly fast, explaining how he raised thousands of dollars for his startup, pulled multiple all-nighters, and worked with this blistering intensity.
But when Duckworth asked him if he saw himself working on the same project in a year or two, he hesitated and said, "Well, I might not be working on the same thing. I might move around a lot."
That young entrepreneur represents the ultimate misconception. He had intensity, but he did not have grit.
In the context of the grit scale, passion is not about a sudden burst of infatuation. It is not an obsessive sprint. It is not the fireworks that erupt in a massive blaze of glory and then quickly fizzle out into smoke.
Passion is about endurance. It is a compass.
It is something that takes a long time to build, to tinker with, and to finally calibrate correctly. But once it is set, it guides you on a long, winding road to your ultimate destination.
Passion is the mathematician who works on the exact same complex theorem for a decade without moving on. It is the chef who finds as much fascination in the nuances of their craft in their 50s as they did on their very first day in the kitchen.
To really visualize how this compass works in our daily lives, we have to talk about the goal hierarchy. I want you to imagine a pyramid of goals. At the very wide bottom of this pyramid, you have your low-level goals.
These are your daily, highly specific to-do lists. Answering emails, going to the gym, making a sales call, getting out the door by 8:00 a.m.
These low-level goals do not matter in and of themselves. They are merely a means to an end. Above them, you have your mid-level goals.
You want to get out the door by 8 a.m. so you can arrive at work on time. You want to arrive on time because you want to be punctual. You want to be punctual because you want to show respect to your colleagues.
And why does that matter? Because you strive to be an effective, empathetic leader. As you keep asking why, you move higher and higher up the pyramid.
Until you reach the pinnacle,
Yeah.
the top-level goal. If you ask why about this final goal, the only answer is just because.
It is not a means to any other end. It is an end in itself. Psychologists refer to this as an ultimate concern. This top-level goal is your compass. It is the unifying theory of your life, giving direction and meaning to every single low-level and mid-level goal below it.
Now, people who lack grit generally fail because their goal hierarchies are a chaotic mess.
The psychologist Gabrielle Oettingen identified one major failure mode, which she calls positive fantasizing.
This happens when someone has a beautiful, shining top-level goal like, I want to be a surgeon, but they have zero mid-level or low-level execution steps supporting it.
They spend their time dreaming about the prestige of the positive future without ever confronting the painful daily grind of studying organic chemistry at 2 a.m.
The other equally dangerous way people fail is by having a massive cluster of competing, disconnected mid-level goals with absolutely no unifying compass at the top.
You are running in 10 different directions, exhausting yourself with endless tasks, but making no forward progress on any meaningful path.
And this is where Warren Buffett's brilliant 5-25 rule for prioritizing is so incredibly valuable.
The story goes that Buffett asked his pilot to write down a list of his 25 top career goals. Then he told him to do some deep soul searching and circle just his top 5.
The most important part of the exercise comes next. What are you supposed to do with the remaining 20 goals?
Most people assume you just keep them on the back burner and work on them when you have spare time. But Buffett said no. Those 20 goals become your avoid-at-all-costs list.
Because they are the ultimate distractions. They are interesting enough to eat away your time and energy, pulling your eye away from the 5 goals that actually matter.
It is a brutal but necessary exercise in focus. Successful people achieve their top-level goals in part by aggressively deciding what not to do.
And Duckworth adds a crucial refinement to Buffett's rule. You must ask yourself, to what extent do these top goals serve a common purpose?
The more they align under one single ultimate concern, the more focused and powerful your passion becomes. However, maintaining this single ultimate concern requires incredible flexibility at the bottom of the pyramid.
Your top-level goal should be written in ink, but your low-level goals must be written in pencil.
When you hit a roadblock, when a specific tactic fails, or when you face rejection at the low level, you must be willing to erase it and try a completely different path to the same end.
A perfect tangible illustration of this flexibility is Bob Mankoff, the legendary cartoon editor for The New Yorker. The sheer volume of rejection he faced is staggering.
Between 1974 and 1977, Bob received roughly 2,000 rejection slips from the magazine.
Contract cartoonists for The New Yorker submit around 500 cartoons a week, and maybe 17 get picked. That is a rejection rate of over 96%.
Bob showed unbelievable grit by keeping his top-level goal written firmly in ink. He wanted to be one of the best cartoonists in the world, but his low-level goals, his daily drawing styles, his specific jokes were written in pencil.
And that is the key difference between stubbornness and grit. When his initial style kept failing, he didn't just blindly try again doing the exact same thing, hoping for a different result. He completely changed his tactics.
He went to the New York Public Library and systematically analyzed every single cartoon the magazine had published since 1925.
He realized that the best cartoons didn't just make the reader laugh, they made the reader think. He also realized that every great cartoonist had a highly distinct, instantly recognizable personal style.
So he adapted. He developed his famous stippling dot style, which he originally learned about by studying the French Impressionist painter Georges Seurat.
And finally, after 2,000 rejections, he got a cartoon accepted. He improvised, he adapted, and he overcame, all while staying true to his top-level goal.
Another stunning example of aligning every daily action to a top-level goal is the Hall of Fame baseball pitcher Tom Seaver. He articulated his ultimate concern perfectly.
He aimed to pitch the best I possibly can day after day, year after year.
That was his compass. That was his ink. And that single goal dictated absolutely every single low-level action in his life. He said pitching determined what he ate when he went to bed and what he did when he was awake.
If it meant staying out of the sun while in Florida to avoid a sunburn that might slightly affect the flexibility of his throwing shoulder, he stayed in the shade.
If it meant eating cottage cheese in the dead of winter instead of chocolate chip cookies to keep his weight down, he ate the cottage cheese.
He even trained himself to pet his dogs and throw heavy logs on the fire with his left hand to protect his pitching arm. Every mundane action derived its significance from its strict allegiance to his ultimate concern.
This should prompt you to evaluate your own hierarchy. Have you written your low-level goals in ink and your top-level goal in pencil?
We so often stubbornly beat our heads against a brick wall on a minor tactical failure, a job that isn't working out, a specific project that is failing, and because the failure hurts, we completely abandon our overarching life philosophy.
We swap our entire compass instead of just taking a simple detour.
Which brings us to what is arguably the most important question of this entire deep dive. If you are listening to this right now and thinking, I don't have this level of grit, I don't have a clear compass, I drop things when they get hard, I am a chronic starter and a chronic quitter.
Is it too late? Are we simply born with a set amount of grit, or can we actually grow it?
This takes us right into the heart of the nature versus nurture debate. And the scientific consensus, overwhelmingly, is that it is both. Grit is a polygenic trait, meaning it is influenced by multiple genes.
There was a comprehensive study of teenage twins in the UK, which estimated that the heritability of the perseverance aspect of grit is about 37%, and the heritability of passion is about 20%.
So yes, some baseline variation is genetic, but look at those numbers. That means the vast majority of grit is dictated by our environment, our experiences, and our active choices.
We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that environments can drastically shape seemingly fixed human traits. The clearest evidence of this is the Flynn effect, discovered by social scientist Jim Flynn.
Over the last century, average IQ scores have increased globally by roughly 15 points every 50 years. If you took a sample of people from a century ago and scored them against modern norms, their average IQ would be 70, which borders on mentally impaired.
That statistic always blows my mind. The human gene pool hasn't mutated that fast. It's impossible. So why are we getting so much better at IQ tests?
Flynn explained it using a brilliant analogy involving basketball. When basketball started being broadcast widely on television, more kids started playing. They saw the pros doing left-handed layups and behind-the-back crossover dribbles, so they went out to their driveways and tried to mimic them.
And because playing against some kids naturally forces you to get better, the overall skill level of the entire game skyrocketed. Flynn called this the social multiplier effect.
The exact same dynamic happened with our brains. Our modern jobs and schooling demand far more abstract analytical reasoning than the rote, repetitive memorization of our grandparents' era.
We are forced to think logically and solve complex puzzles every single day, and so our collective intelligence adapts and rises to meet the environmental demand.
We see the same thing with human height. We are inches taller than our ancestors from 150 years ago, not because of sudden genetic changes, but because of environmental factors like better nutrition, modern medicine, and clean water. The environment creates the growth.
And this profound adaptability applies directly to grit through a concept psychologists call the maturity principle. When researchers look at cross-sectional data of adults across different ages, the grittiest people are consistently in their late 60s and older, while the least gritty are in their 20s.
Now, part of this might be a cultural cohort effect. The greatest generation grew up in an era defined by the Great Depression and World War II, which demanded immense perseverance.
But a much larger part of this is that grit naturally grows as we mature. We learn life lessons. We adapt when our circumstances demand it.
Duckworth shares a highly relatable anecdote about a headmaster whose teenage daughter was chronically late to school every single morning. Despite endless lecturing, she couldn't get her act together. Then she got a summer job folding clothes at a local retail store.
On her very first day, the manager looked her in the eye and told her, "The first time you're late, you're fired."
And instantly her behavior changed. She started setting 2 alarms. She was out the door 10 minutes early. She was never late to that job. Because the real world doesn't care if your parents think you're special. It demands that you deliver.
Necessity is the mother of adaptation. When the stakes are real and tangible, we rise to the occasion. And those new forced behaviors eventually solidify into habitual traits.
But we don't just have to wait around for life to force us to grow up. Duckworth outlines 4 specific psychological assets that mature paragons of grit actively develop, and they happen in a very specific sequential order.
Interest, practice, purpose, and hope. These 4 assets are the true roadmap for cultivating grit, and we need to unpack each one thoroughly.
Let's do it.
Number 1 is interest. Passion begins with intrinsically enjoying what you do. It requires a childlike curiosity and an enduring fascination with the subject.
Number 2 is practice. But this isn't just about logging hours. It is the daily, often grueling discipline of trying to do things better than we did yesterday. It is zeroing in on your specific weaknesses and resisting the comfort of complacency.
Number 3 is purpose. This is the deep conviction that your work actually matters, that it is integrally connected to the well-being of others. Interest without purpose is nearly impossible to sustain for a lifetime.
And number 4 is hope. This isn't just a stage at the end. It defines every single step of the journey. It is the active, rising to the occasion perseverance that allows you to get back up after being knocked down.
Let's dive deep into that first asset, interest. Because I think this is where so many people get completely paralyzed right out of the gate.
We are constantly told in graduation speeches and self-help books to follow our passion. But we have been conditioned by movies to expect passion to be a sudden, dramatic epiphany. We expect a cinematic moment with swelling orchestral music where the clouds part and you suddenly know your life's destiny.
The sources talk about Julia Child, the legendary chef. People love to romanticize the story of her first meal in France, a perfect sole meunier sizzling in Normandy butter.
She took one bite and described it as an opening up of her soul. We hear that and think, aha, that's the magical moment. She was born to be a chef and she instantly knew it.
But that narrative completely misrepresents the messy reality of how passion actually develops. That single bite of fish was just a trigger. It was a spark. What followed were years of proactive, often tedious interest development.
She ate countless meals in Parisian bistros, analyzing the flavors. She built friendships with local butchers and fishmongers. She subjected herself to grueling hours of cooking classes at Le Cordon Bleu under a highly demanding, unforgiving chef.
She interacted with other women who wanted to write a comprehensive French cookbook for Americans. Passion is not discovered through passive introspection. It is triggered by messy, inefficient, hands-on interactions with the outside world. And often, you don't even realize a passion is forming until you look back years later.
There's a heartbreakingly relatable Reddit post mentioned in the sources from a 30-something who is experiencing exactly this paralysis. They wrote, "I'm interested in so much stuff that I'm paralyzed to try anything. I have a fleeting interest in everything. No career direction."
Psychologist Barry Schwartz gives the absolute best advice for this mindset. He says that finding a career passion is exactly like finding a romantic partner. Young people often hold out for this mythical perfection. They want someone who is flawlessly attractive, incredibly smart, deeply funny, and perfectly kind right from the first date.
But that person doesn't exist. Meeting a promising match is only the very beginning of the process. The true exhilaration comes from sticking with it, getting elbow deep into the relationship, navigating the conflicts, and discovering facets of that person you never knew existed.
You cannot just sit in your room and introspect your way into a passion. You have to interact. You have to try things and expect that the initial spark of discovery will be followed by a massive amount of proactive, effortful development.
And part of that development means accepting that boredom and frustration are perfectly normal. When you hit a plateau in learning a new skill, the thought, this isn't worth the effort, will inevitably cross your mind.
The key is recognizing that passion is constructed proactively over time. It doesn't magically sustain itself just because you are interested. You need to actively build a crew of encouraging supporters, mentors, peers, coaches.
Look at Chef Mark Vetri. He wasn't a great student growing up. He had a stutter and felt like a social outcast. But he found a community when he started washing dishes in a restaurant.
He loved watching the line cooks, the banter, the camaraderie, the feeling of belonging to a team. That supportive, immersive environment allowed his initial tiny spark of interest to grow into a blazing, lifelong passion for culinary arts.
You have to actively curate the environment that will sustain your interest when the initial novelty wears off. Okay, so once we have constructed that interest, we hit the second asset, practice.
And this is where things get really tough. Because we aren't just talking about playing around with a hobby. We are talking about the daily discipline to exceed your current skill level. What does this actually look like in practice?
It looks like deliberate practice, which is fundamentally different from just logging hours. Deliberate practice is profoundly uncomfortable. It requires you to set a stretch goal that is just slightly beyond your current capabilities.
It requires you to focus entirely on what you cannot do, rather than enjoying what you are already good at. Going back to Dan Chambliss's swimmers, deliberate practice isn't just swimming laps for 2 hours.
It is spending an hour solely focused on keeping your elbow high during the catch phase of your stroke, seeking immediate critical feedback from a coach, and then doing it again and again until it becomes automatic.
It's like John Irving. He didn't just write a draft and say, well, I practiced writing today. He subjected himself to the grueling, meticulous process of rewriting a single paragraph 20 times, constantly identifying the weak verbs and the clunky pacing.
Deliberate practice means you are actively seeking failure in the micro moments so you can succeed in the macro. It's stepping onto Will Smith's treadmill every single day, fully knowing it's going to hurt, because that is the only way the muscle grows.
Precisely. And that level of discomfort brings us to the third asset, purpose. Because, let's be honest, nobody can sustain the agony of deliberate practice for decades if they are only doing it for themselves.
Interest is inherently selfish. It's about what fascinates you. But purpose is entirely selfless. It is the deep conviction that your work matters to other people.
There is that classic parable of the bricklayers that perfectly captures this. You walk up to 3 bricklayers and ask them what they're doing. The first one says, I'm laying bricks. The second one says, I'm building a church. But the third one says, I'm building the house of God.
They are all doing the exact same mundane physical task, but their psychological experience is entirely different.
Exactly. The first has a job, the second has a career, but the third has a calling. When you connect your daily grind to the well-being of others, it unlocks a massive reserve of resilience.
Think about Tom Seaver. His purpose wasn't just to throw a ball fast. It was to perform at a level of excellence that inspired millions of fans and honored the game of baseball.
When you realize that your efforts contribute to society, or support your family, or push your field forward, the discomfort of deliberate practice becomes a necessary sacrifice rather than a pointless suffering.
And that leads us to the final asset, which wraps around all the others, hope. But we have to be very clear about what kind of hope we are talking about here. This isn't the passive hope of buying a lottery ticket and crossing your fingers wishing for a sunny day.
No, the hope that characterizes grit is fiercely active. It is the expectation that our own efforts can improve our future. It is the exact opposite of learned helplessness, a concept Marty Seligman famously stuttered.
Learned helplessness is what happens when we experience uncontrollable suffering and we eventually just give up, concluding that our actions don't matter.
Gritty hope is learned optimism. It is the deeply ingrained habit of explaining setbacks as temporary, specific, and changeable. When a gritty person fails, they don't say, I'm stupid and I'll always be a failure. They say, I used the wrong strategy this time and I will fix it tomorrow.
It is the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. Active hope is the engine that keeps you getting back on the treadmill day after day, year after year.
This has been an incredibly profound journey. We started by completely busting the myth of the natural, seeing how tests like the whole candidate score failed to predict survival, and how our hidden naturalness bias secretly sabotages our potential.
We dove into the mathematical reality that effort counts twice. It builds your skill, and it turns that skill into monumental achievement.
We learned how to build a proper goal hierarchy, keeping our top-level compass written in ink and our lower-level daily tactics in pencil.
And finally, we explored how passion isn't a magical firework. It's a slow, deliberate burn that requires messy discovery, agonizing practice, a deep sense of purpose, and relentless active hope. If you want to view your life through the lens of true potential, this framework is your absolute blueprint.
And as we close out our analysis of the source material today, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We spend so much of our lives feeling deeply guilty when we quit something. We label ourselves as lazy, as flakes, or as people who just can't stick with anything.
We carry the heavy shame of abandoned exercise bikes, half-finished novels, and abandoned career paths.
But if we truly understand the goal hierarchy, we have to look at our past completely differently. What if your past quitting wasn't a lack of grit at all?
What if you were, in fact, brilliantly and successfully pruning your avoided-all-cost list?
What if erasing those blocked, unfulfilling low-level goals was the exact necessary step to make room for the one top-level compass you were always meant to follow?
That completely flips the script. It removes the shame. It gives us permission to forgive our past detours and focus entirely on executing that ultimate concern. So, to you listening, embrace your inner striver. Don't let the toxic myth of talent put a false ceiling on what you can achieve. Keep getting back on that treadmill. Keep pruning your distractions and dive deep into your own incredible potential. We'll be right here with you next time.